43, my Amish husband guarded one drawer our entire marriage. His final words told me why the stove was cold that morning. In 41 years, it had never been cold at 6 a.m. I stood at the counter in the gray winter light, the kind that comes through plain white curtains and lands on everything like an apology. And I reached for 2 cups before I remembered the wood smell was still there. Old wool, the particular warmth that a body leaves behind in the walls of a house it has lived in for decades. I put 1 cup back, and I did not look at the drawer. My name is Sarah, and this channel is where I tell the stories I kept quiet for too long. If something in this is already sitting heavy in your chest, stay. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, have you ever chosen not to ask something because you were afraid of the answer? I have thought about how to begin this story for a long time, not because I don't know where it starts. I know exactly where it starts. I have thought about it because some stories carry a weight that changes the moment you speak them aloud. They are one thing kept inside. They become something else entirely once there are words around them, once another person is listening. This is one of those stories. It is about my husband, Jonas. It is about 41 years of marriage. It is about one drawer in a chest he built with his own hands in the corner of our bedroom, a drawer I never opened, not once. In 41 years, Jonas was not a complicated man, at least not in any of the ways the world outside would understand as complicated. He did not speak more than he needed to. He did not take up room he hadn't earned. His hands were wide and careful, the hands of a man who built furniture the way some people say prayers. Slowly and with full attention, he folded his coat the same way every evening, placed it over the same chair, sat down in the same spot at our table. There was a steadiness to him that I mistook for many years for simplicity. What I understand now is that steadiness and simplicity are not the same thing, not even close. The first time I noticed the drawer, we had been married perhaps 3 months. I was putting linens away, still learning the geography of our home, still discovering which hinges squeaked and which floorboards shifted. I pulled the wrong drawer. It slid open perhaps an inch before I felt his presence behind me. He had crossed the room without a sound, which was a thing Jonas could do, move through a space and leave almost no trace of the movement. He put his hand gently over mine and pressed the drawer closed. "That one's mine, Sarah." That was all he said, soft, not unkind, final. I never pulled it open again. And in our community, the old order district in Lancaster, where I grew up and married and raised 5 children, that was not strange. That was simply Ordnung, the unwritten order that shaped everything. How we dressed, how we worshipped, how we spoke to one another, how we moved through our days. Gelassenheit, yieldedness, surrender was not just a word we were taught. It was a posture, a way of being. A wife yielded to her husband, not out of smallness, but out of a belief that submission was itself a form of love. I believed that. For a long time, I believed it without question. For 41 years, I told myself I wasn't curious, that I had made peace with the drawer the way you make peace with the one locked room in a house. You simply learn which paths to walk, which corners to avoid. But the truth, the one I am only now able to say plainly, is this. I was afraid, not of what he was hiding from me. I was afraid of what it would mean if I found something I didn't understand. If the drawer contained a version of my husband I had never been shown. That fear sat in me like a cold stone. I carried it quietly, the way women in our community carried most things without naming it, without setting it down. Our life together was beautiful. I want to say that plainly, because I know how these stories can sound from the outside, and I will not let grief turn 41 years into something smaller than they were. We planted together in spring. We canned together in late summer, the kitchen warm and smelling of tomatoes and beeswax. Sunday singings where Jonas would stand with the other men across the room and find my face once, just once, with his eyes, and that would be enough for the whole week. Our children grew up knowing they were loved. Our silences were full. That is the only way I know to say it. We had a full silence. There was a woman in our district named Miriam, older than me by perhaps 15 years, soft-spoken in the way that only women who have survived considerable grief become soft-spoken. She was the closest thing I had to a confidant, which in our world meant someone you walked beside after Sunday service and spoke to in careful, measured words. I told her once obliquely about the drawer. I did not say it directly. We rarely said difficult things directly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There are rooms in a man that even God doesn't furnish. You learn to sweep the hallway and love him anyway." I held on to that for years. I held on to that. In the last months of Jonas's illness, his bed was moved to the main room, closer to the warmth, closer to everything. He was weak but alert, his eyes still clear and watchful even when the rest of him had grown small. Some evenings I would look up from my work and find him watching the bedroom corner, the drawer. He watched it the way you watch something you are still deciding about. I saw it. I said nothing. And on the last night, the night I did not know yet was the last night, he asked me to come sit beside him. I did. He held my hand without speaking. The lamp was low. I thought, this is the moment. He will tell me now. He fell asleep instead. And I stayed awake until morning, listening to him breathe, thinking that 41 years of not asking had not been weakness at all. It had been the longest, quietest form of love I knew how to give. I knew it before I checked. There is a stillness that is different from sleep, a quiet that has an actual shape to it, a weight that fills a room differently than the weight of a man simply resting. 41 years of sleeping beside someone teaches you the sound of their breathing, the way you know a hymn you have sung 10,000 times. When that sound stopped somewhere in the last dark hour before dawn, I did not move for a long time. I simply sat beside him, holding a hand that was still warm in a house that had already begun in some imperceptible way to become only mine. The community came, as it always does. That is one of the true gifts of the life I was born into. You are never left alone with death. The women arrived first, quiet and capable, and they did what needed doing with a tenderness that I could not have managed myself that day. The bishop came and prayed. Neighbors brought food. More food than 5 people could eat in a week, left in silence on the kitchen table. The house filled, and then by evening, emptied again. One by one they left. Doors closed softly, and then it was just me and the cold stove, and the low sound of wind against the plain white curtains, and the drawer still there, still waiting. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long time before I walked in. The chest Jonas had built sat against the far wall, walnut, hand-fitted, the grain running in long, quiet lines that I had looked at for 4 decades without ever really studying. He had made this piece 22 years into our marriage, in the workshop behind the barn, over the course of one winter. I remember the smell of fresh sawdust on his coat when he came inside those evenings. I remember thinking it was the most beautiful thing he had ever built. I put my hand on the wood now. It was cool and smooth. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. Then I pulled the drawer open. It did not stick. It did not creak. It opened the way things open when they have been tended carefully for a very long time. Smoothly on runners worn patient by years of small, deliberate use inside. A bundle of folded papers tied with a length of dark thread, the same kind used to bind the covers of old prayer books. Beside the papers, a pressed flower, flat and faded, the color of it gone to pale gold. I recognized it immediately, even after all those years. It was from the garden bed I planted in our 2nd year of marriage, before the children came and the garden shrank to practical things. I had forgotten it entirely. He had not. The Amish do not take photographs in my community. This was not simply discouraged. It was understood as a form of pride, an elevation of the self that ran against everything Gelassenheit asks of us, which is why it took me a full breath to understand what I was looking at. It was me, taken from a distance without my knowledge. In the way you photograph something you are afraid will disappear if you look at it too directly. I was standing in the garden, summer light, my back slightly turned, the way I stand when no one is watching. He had kept it for years in a drawer no Ordnung could reach. If you have ever wanted proof that a person truly saw you, that is what proof looks like. If something in this story is sitting with you, if you recognize this particular silence, this particular kind of love that had no language for itself, I want you to stay for what comes next. My name is Sarah, and these are the stories I kept folded away for too long. Subscribe to this channel so you are here when the next one comes. And I will be right back with you in one moment. Because the papers, what was written inside them, that is the part that changed everything. I thought I understood about the man I had lived beside for 41 years. The pages were not a journal. They were loose, some yellowed at the edges, some newer, written at different times across what I later understood were 4 decades of our marriage. Short observations, not confessions, not grievances, observations of me. The way I laughed the summer the harvest went badly, and I laughed anyway because, as he wrote, she will not let a hard season have the last word. A note from the year our youngest was born. She does not know how much light she carries. I am keeping this safe until I know how to say it. A single line, undated. Watched her pray this morning, did not tell her. Some things are too holy to interrupt. Each one small. Together they were enormous, and then I remembered what he had said at dawn. On the last morning, he had woken unexpectedly. Eyes clear, voice steadier than it had been in weeks. He took my hand, he said, not in the low German we used for most of our private words, but in plain English, which was how Jonas spoke when something mattered too much for habit. I wrote it all down. Don't throw it away. I want you to know that I saw you. I had not understood it then. I had held those words in my chest all through that long day like something I was waiting to translate. Now, standing at the open drawer, the papers in my hands, I understood. He had been trying to say it for 41 years. The Ordnung gave him no clean language for it, no tradition of love letters, no custom of spoken tenderness between a husband and wife. So he had built himself one, a private one, a drawer no rule could govern, no community could enter, no yielding was required of him inside. This was where Jonas kept the one thing Gelassenheit could not ask him to surrender. The record of how completely, how carefully, how quietly he had loved me. I called on Miriam the next evening. We sat together in her kitchen without speaking for a long time, the way women who have known each other through grief can sit. I told her not everything, but enough. She listened with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the window. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply, so he found his own room, that was all. I did not need more than that, because she was right. Inside a life that asked both of us to become smaller, to yield, to hold the self loosely, Jonas had found the one room that was entirely his, and he had filled it entirely with me. That is not a small thing. I am not sure it is anything other than the definition of love. I kept the papers. I folded them back the way he had them, in the same order, with the same dark thread. I pressed the drawer closed. The photograph I placed on top face down, not hidden, just private. Still, I did not put the second cup away. I still set it out in the mornings, and I have made my peace with that small, stubborn habit. And if you are reading this, if you are living beside someone quiet, someone who has never found the word for what they feel, someone whose love comes out sideways, in the work of their hands, in the things they keep, in the spaces they guard without explanation, look carefully at what they protect, what they will not let get lost, what they tend in secret, not out of shame, but out of a love large for the language they were given. That is where it lives. That has always been where it lives.